There is a moment when a single truth hits you so hard that it refuses to leave your mind. You have been shaping your destiny through the very things you silently allow. This realization is not gentle. It shakes something inside you, and once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Hello, I am your advisor, Napoleon Hill, and today we will confront a truth that most people spend their entire lives avoiding. You become the person your tolerances create. Your routines, your standards, your excuses, your relationships, your habits, everything you allow shapes the identity you live inside. Nothing changes until what you accept changes first. What you will discover in this lesson is not motivational comfort. It is a mirror. You will learn how tolerance rewires the subconscious mind, how it quietly lowers your vibration, how it hides in daily choices, and how it slowly writes a destiny far below your potential. And yet, the moment you decide to stop tolerating what weakens you, your entire identity begins to shift. By the end of this video, one truth will stand unshakable. Your future rises or falls based on the limits you enforce and the ones you no longer allow. Every decline begins quietly. People imagine their lives collapse through a single dramatic moment, but Hill observed the opposite. Life deteriorates in fragments, through small permissions granted to the mind. First, a harmful habit slips through. Then, a negative thought becomes familiar. Later, a weakened routine feels normal. And before a person realizes it, these tiny allowances have shaped their identity. This is why Hill believed tolerance is one of the most dangerous forces in personal growth. What you allow becomes what you accept, and what you accept becomes who you are. It happens so quietly that most people never trace their decline back to these first invisible permissions. And once this truth becomes clear, another principle emerges with even greater force. Your mental pattern determines your destiny. There is a hidden architecture behind every life outcome, and Hill discovered that this structure is entirely built in the mind. Nothing external truly shifts until the internal pattern shifts first. What you accept as normal becomes the blueprint your subconscious mind follows. If someone tolerates chaos, their thoughts organize around chaos. If they tolerate indiscipline, their actions align with indiscipline. Tolerate mediocrity long enough, and the mind adapts to it as a standard. The mind is not neutral. It mirrors what you repeatedly allow. Hill explained that your dominant mental pattern operates like a magnet, pulling experiences that match your inner vibration. People often blame circumstances for their limitations, but circumstances are usually the reflection of mental habits tolerated for years. Prosperity, growth, discipline, and success require patterns that support them. Without that foundation, the outer world remains unchanged. Once a person sees how their mental tolerance shapes their identity and destiny, the illusion of randomness dissolves. Nothing in their life is accidental. It is patterned. And that realization can be both uncomfortable and liberating. Uncomfortable because it reveals responsibility. Liberating because it reveals power. And understanding this leads directly into one of the most destructive traps Hill warned about: the vicious cycle of tolerance. A quiet loop begins the moment someone allows a small behavior they know is beneath their potential. At first, the tolerance feels harmless, a miscommitment here, a weak decision there. But small allowances breed larger ones. Soon, the mind adjusts, convincing the person that this new pattern is simply how life is. What once felt wrong becomes familiar, and what becomes familiar eventually becomes identity. This cycle is dangerous because it hides itself. Tolerance leads to adaptation. Adaptation shapes identity. Identity dictates destiny. By the time someone notices the decline, years of silent compromise have already rewritten their self-image. The person no longer sees their choices as choices. They see them as part of who they are. And once identity absorbs mediocrity, the subconscious mind works tirelessly to preserve it. Hill warned that this cycle is how entire lives drift away without dramatic events or visible chaos. Most people don't lose their potential in a single failure. They lose it in thousands of tiny concessions. Each tolerated weakness reinforces a mental pattern that becomes increasingly harder to break. And this brings us face to face with a difficult question. What have you been tolerating in silence? Every person carries a private list of things they endure quietly, long before they ever admit them out loud. Hill identified these hidden tolerances as some of the greatest destroyers of potential. People allow draining relationships, toxic environments, broken promises, weakening habits, and excuses they know are lies. Over time, these tolerated elements create emotional noise that blocks clarity, discipline, and the ability to think with purpose. Consider how easy it is to normalize something harmful. You keep someone in your life who diminishes your energy. You stay in an environment that shrinks your ambition. You accept behaviors from yourself that contradict the identity you want to build. At first, these tolerances feel temporary, but soon they blend into the background, quietly shaping your mindset of success into a mindset of survival. Hill's question cuts straight to the truth. What have you accepted as normal that is quietly killing your potential? The answer often hides in the areas you avoid thinking about, the excuses you repeat, the habits you justify, the standards you lowered without noticing. Facing these truths is uncomfortable, but it is the doorway to liberation. And once this door opens, the mind begins to reveal the deeper danger, the normalization of the unacceptable. There is a subtle mechanism inside the human mind that Hill studied with great caution. The brain adapts to whatever it encounters repeatedly, even when that thing is harmful. What once felt uncomfortable gradually becomes familiar, and what becomes familiar eventually feels safe. This adaptation creates the illusion that a weakening situation is acceptable. The mind begins to call it normal, even when it quietly destroys ambition and discipline. Imagine a person sitting in a dimly lit room. At first, the darkness feels strange, but with time, their eyes adjust. Soon, they forget how bright the world outside can be. That is exactly how normalization works. You tolerate a small discomfort, then a larger one, and eventually the mind settles into a version of life far below your potential. The danger is not the discomfort itself, but the comfort that grows around it. This explains why change feels so difficult for so many. The subconscious mind has already accepted a lower standard as home. The habits, environments, and excuses that once bothered you no longer trigger resistance. You have trained your own mind to embrace less than you deserve. Hill warned that breaking free from this trap requires a jolt of awareness, a disruption strong enough to challenge the comfort you built. And that realization sets the stage for a story that changed Hill's life forever. During his decades of interviews with the most successful minds of his era, Hill noticed a striking pattern that few people ever talk about. The individuals who rose to greatness were not simply disciplined or talented. They were uncompromising about what they allowed into their inner world. They protected their energy, their standards, and their identity with almost surgical precision. Nothing that diminished their potential was tolerated, not even once. In conversation after conversation, Hill heard variations of the same idea expressed with unwavering conviction. I do not tolerate anything that makes me smaller than I can be. This wasn't arrogance, it was awareness. These individuals understood that every tolerated weakness, excuse, or environment reshaped the subconscious mind. They refused to let anything chip away at their clarity or dilute the vibration they needed to achieve their vision. Meanwhile, ordinary people tolerated almost everything. They allowed